Hello, welcome everyone. I hope that you are all having a great Saturday morning. We really are excited to bring you a very thought-provoking time right now to have a discussion around an important matter in lesson design. Today we have two very, very special guests. One is Nicole Taylor, who is an instructional technology coordinator from Texas and a good friend. We also have Jenna Hewitt-King, who is a high school English teacher in our own district, and we're here to have a frank talk about lesson design as it relates to anti-racist curriculum. And I'm just very excited to introduce you to our special friends. So thank you, Nicole, for joining us. Thank you, Jenna, for joining us. I was just mentioning that this is a community so rich in discussion around good lesson design and connecting and collaborating with each other, and I really appreciate this community. But when we created Teachers Give Teachers, we started to notice there was a lack of lessons that really addressed anti-racist curriculum. There was, it kind of centered around celebrating the holiday months, and I've really struggled with how do we make this shift? How do we improve this? How do we help educators improve their lesson design to not make it an add-on, something that is a thread through everything that they're doing. And I'm so happy that you and Nicole, you and Jenna are here today. Where do we even start, right? Nicole, I guess I can start with even saying, how can we support our students and families in having these conversations around what's going on in our world today? We've all been watching the news all week. And it's been devastating to watch.
Yeah, Lisa, I agree. I think that before we can even think about like supporting students and supporting families, I'm like a strong believer in like, first you got to do the work yourself. Because I mean, you can't support people from a place of ignorance because if you do that, you'll cause more harm than you will help. And I think a lot of the issues around anti-racist work, it lies in the first step being looking at your own practices and looking at your own biases and figuring out how you can uproot racism in your own heart and in your own life and in your own pedagogy and practices. So I think like the first step is just figuring out like how to do the work yourself. And I mean, even speaking like just talking about Nicole, I can say that I kind of started that journey a few years ago, just learning about what I didn't know, figuring out what I did, because there's so much about even my own history that I just was never taught. I just didn't know. And so that has been my first step. And as you're figuring out, you know, who you are and figuring out how to become anti-racist, then bring others along the journey, but tag other teachers in to first do the self-work. It doesn't start with the picture book, trying to take kids on a journey that you haven't been on yourself.
I love that. I just want to add to that, you know, so many teachers are referring to this conversation to be student-centered because they're like, I've been doing social justice work with my students, right? Like I've had these conversations before. And oftentimes that makes them or us feel like we don't have to go back and do that self-work because we're already in the space of doing some of the other work. And so I just want to call that into the space too, that even if you've been doing social justice work in your classroom for 20 years, like this is the time where we all have to take a few steps back and reevaluate how we're contributing to these systems that are causing inequities with our students and in our world, right? We're talking about big picture stuff, not just looking in the tunnel of education, because everything outside of education impacts what's happening in our rooms as well. So I just want to name that that's some of the pushback I get from teachers is like, oh, well, I've been teaching this way for this long. Like, I know that already. And I mean, I've been doing social justice work for over 10 years and I still am learning new stuff every single day. I'm finding new things that I can do better as a human every single day. I didn't start studying whiteness until 2 years ago, 3 years ago, right? And that's 7 years of social justice work, ignoring such a big part of my role in it. And so I just want to invite teachers who might be feeling like, I'm doing the work in the classroom, I feel ready for it, to consider how you can take a few steps back and do this work that Nicole's proposing, do this self-reflection piece. Even if it feels repetitive, how can you remind yourself of where you're at?
Right. And I think too, like Jenna, just thinking about like right now more than ever, like in the middle of a global pandemic, like we're also like, we have a national pandemic where Black men, Black women are being killed in the street. It's being filmed. Our kids see that. So right now, while we're in the summer, while we're at home, like you are primed, like you're in the position to start that work. Because what you want to do is when you get back to your classrooms, you want to be able to help. You want to give kids a space to share, and you want to be able to support them. But if you don't start with the self work, and like Jenna said, just like learning about whiteness, learning how systemic racism have poised our kids to fail and not be successful, and your part in that, like how you can uproot racism, then you will definitely do more harm than good. So taking that first step is that self-work for sure.
Nicole, you bring up a good point. Jenna was saying her last day of school was yesterday. So thank you, Jenna, for being here the day after school ended. But you've been doing this work in the classroom, Jenna, and it was interesting, your perspective of doing this work during the time of remote instruction and how different that was. You want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah. I was really struggling because I felt like a lot of the work I do in response, like a lot of my activism is in the classroom. Like that's where I'm doing so much of my work, I feel like, and that's where my comfort zone in this too is. And I'm working on challenging myself to move beyond that. But so I was feeling really stuck around like this video of Ahmaud Arbery being brutally murdered in the street came out. I know my students are seeing it and I don't have access to process with them. And at the same time, my freshmen are reading Warriors Don't Cry about the Little Rock Nine and the integration after Brown v. Board of Education. My sophomores are reading To Kill a Mockingbird, like a direct story about injustice against Black folks. And so I was just feeling really stuck around what to do. And I hosted an optional Zoom meeting for my students who wanted to process, and I'm grateful that kids took the time to come on and we got to have that conversation and draw some connections. But it still felt really hard. And then this last week of school, more is coming out, right? Like the cycle is taking us around. We see something, we talk about it, then we forget. Then we see something, we talk about it, we forget, right? We're in another round of that here. And I didn't know how to access my students. And I still don't really, like now we're in summer and I don't know how to access my students. So I think in remote learning, it looks different. And I think that's also why we should be taking advantage of this unique opportunity to pause and do the self-work, right? To name to our students, my invitation on the last day of school was stay aware, keep reading the news, see what you can do to talk to people around you. But that's where I left it, because I also recognize that I still need to do some processing around what this looks like and means for me right now. And so I would say that the invitation as teachers during this time shouldn't be to jump to our students right away when we need to do some processing around it. We need to figure out what it looks like. And we have the time to do that now that most of us are jumping into summer.
I'm finding too, Jenna, like a lot of people just do nothing. So I like to think that most people are good, you know, that most people want things to be better, that most people like, you know, they don't want the country to be in the place that it is now. But like even in thinking about like, you know, my time as an educator over the last 18 years, and like this isn't the first incident, this isn't the 10th incident, but time and time again, like I have seen like classroom teachers, campus leaders, district leaders who like do absolutely nothing. And I like to think that it's because they don't know what to do. And so oftentimes we do nothing because we don't want to make a mistake. But I also feel like silence speak so much louder than doing something. Silence is oftentimes, to me, it just feels as if you're siding with, that you're taking a side when you don't speak up. So like, what are you, because in my role, I am privileged. Like, I support some amazing K-12 teachers over 9 campuses, but I'm not like in the classroom and like in the trenches and doing this work that you're doing so well. So like, if there's a teacher or an administrator, like, and they, they're doing nothing because they don't know like where to start, like where do you suggest like they start?
That's a great question. And I think that for me, I'm thinking about 2 pieces of this. My one piece is like, we have this image of doing something that looks like this big thing. And I think that's what scares people away from doing the work, right? And just saying, I don't want to do something wrong. And I've been calling a lot of friends out and calling a lot of friends in during this time and thanking them because they're just saying anything. Like, they're just sharing a comment about it, or they're responding to someone else's comment on Facebook, or whatever that looks like. And those small actions can go a lot further than we give them credit for. And so I think that that starting piece can just be a conversation. And it doesn't have to be a conversation with a student. It can be a colleague. It can be your partner. It can be someone in your family. Like, have the conversation so that you can do a little bit of processing. And then the second piece that I'm thinking about too is just around modeling, right? We often are asking our students to come to class, be vulnerable, engage in discourse and critical conversation, respect each other while doing that. Like, there's so many layers to what we expect young people to do in these conversations. Are we modeling that in our lives outside of the classroom? Are we having discourse with other people? Are we engaging in conversation that is respectful, but also moving us forward, right? Are we challenging things that seem wrong or hurtful or unfair? And I think I have to constantly remind myself when I get in that space of like, do I want to comment on Auntie's post about so-and-so and say like, well, I would challenge my student to not be a bystander to this. Can I model that behavior for them? And so thinking, again, outside of the classroom, doing this work right now matters. And it doesn't have to be this big thing. You don't have to show up to a physical protest if that's not your thing. Don't feel the pressure to jump into something that doesn't feel like a response that would work for you, right? But have the conversations, because those are the things we're going to ask kids to do later on.
Jen, I appreciate that you said that your activism is in the classroom, is teaching. That is your place to be able to spread this information. Nicole, where else do you see that happening, that kind of work being done?
I would say personally, my journey has just been to connect with like-minded educators. Jenna and I are connected. She's not going to get rid of me ever.
I don't want to.
But I have found my people on social media. Like, Clear the Air is a great space for me. It's full of educators that are doing the work, that really want to see anti-racist buildings and classrooms and spaces that educate all children and just are raising better humans. And so even with that work, the books that we read, the conversations that we have, Jenna said something that just like struck a chord with me, that it's so much more than like don't talk about it, be about it. Because she talked about like moving forward, like doing something actionable. So I think you see a lot of people who are making posts, who are reading books, but like what happens from that? And sometimes, sometimes with me, it may just be me reflecting on how like what I expose my kids to and the places that we go and the spaces and the things that we do. But the one that as she was talking, I was just like, that's exactly what's needed here. Is like, it's more than a post. It's more than a text, which those are great things. Like Jenna said, like that can really spark something, but like what comes from that? Because this isn't the first time we found ourselves here, but I think the problem is like, there's no action on it. We cry, we feel bad, we feel sad, but like, what are you doing? I'm a strong believer, like you do what you can with what you have in the space that you are in. So in my corner of the world, I'm raising 3 Black children that are proud of who they are, that know where they come from, that can smell racism a mile away, that know how to challenge respectfully, that know how to have conversations. Like, so going forward, like, it's more than just seeing it. Like, what are we doing? How are we putting things in action? And so I've just connected with a lot of people who are doing, like, it's, they're calling people, they've called me in and they've allowed me to really see myself and see how I can improve and what I can do better. And from that, I mean, I'm a totally different person today than I was 5 years ago. How I see myself in the world, how I see the impact that I have on the decisions that I make, the relationships that I build, the space that I take up. So more than just like connecting, like Jenna, that pulled at my heartstring. Like, what are we doing with all this connecting and all this conversating and all these posts? Like, what springs from that? So
I love that you said doing can be reflecting. Like, right when you said that, I looked over at my journal of like, you're right. Like, I read something and then I go, oh, I got to do some processing around this, right? And that's doing some of the work, is that self-reflection piece. And then that conversation aspect of it, that you're saying, like, I call people or people call me. And one of the things, this is actually how Lisa and I connected about doing this today, is I posted, white people, stop calling your Black friends. They don't want to talk to you right now. Call me. Like, I'm willing. I want to talk to you. And so even that invitation to call in people who are like, I don't know what to do right now. I'm really uncomfortable. I don't want to say the wrong thing to this person. I get people who constantly message me like, is this an okay article to share, or do you think that it's centering whiteness? Or like, ask those questions, number one, if you're the person on the other end. And two, if you feel like I'm ready to have the conversation, invite people in to be the host of that, right? Say, I'm a safe space. You can process with me. That's the work we need to be doing as well. And I also love that you brought in the parenting piece, because I've had so many friends call me and go like, how do I raise my white kids to like be aware of this? And I'm not a parent, so I'm like, I don't know if you're asking a trusted source, but I can find resources to share with them, and naming that conversation around, it's never like, you're never too young to start talking about race.
mm-hmm.
Brown kids are never too young to recognize their race, right? It's so much data shows that they're exposed to racism. By the time they're 5 years old, they've already had some sort of experience, right? And so can we stop sheltering white kids to that reality by bringing them into the conversation too? So I love that you brought in those two, like parenting is a tool, right? Is an important one. And then also this self-reflection piece of like, yeah, I love it.
Nicole, I've been noticing lately you've been posting a lot about children's literature as a vehicle as well. What have you been discovering about that? And I know, Jen, that's near to your heart too.
Yeah, I'm a bibliophile. I read. Like, if I need to learn it, I'm going to find a book to read about it. And so even she brought up parenting in our home. When we need to talk about something, then it generally will start with the book. And then I'm also, anytime I read something and I learn something, I'm trying to figure out how to paraphrase it and share it with my kids, because I want them to learn also. So just with the things that are going on, I have 2 kids that are in 3rd grade. And then I have a 16-year-old, actually they're going to 4th grade, right? And then I have a 16-year-old junior. And so he's a little older. And so I can kind of just toss him the book and say, read this excerpt and let's talk about it. But with the news and the things that have been going on, I'm really looking for things that I can share with my younger 2 to help them unpack and be able to share their feelings, because a lot of times younger kids just don't know how to tell you what they're feeling, whether it be fear or sadness or anger. And so in our home, we have more books than anything else in this house. And so I'm constantly just looking for books that speak to the things that we need to discuss. And so, yeah, I just kind of put it out there. Hey, what K-6 books are you using to like lean into like anti-racist conversations with elementary school students? And a few of the books I have, but I have a lot of new reads that we'll be able to buy to just have some of those conversations in our home.
Jenna, what do you think? How does that apply as a high school teacher? Isn't that
I mean, I love that you're pulling in that like teenagers, you can kind of talk up front with them, right? And people always ask me like, "Ooh, how do you talk to your kids about this in class?" And I'm like, they are smart. Like they can have adult conversations and they enjoy having adult conversations. Like I constantly hear from students like, "Oh, my other teachers don't really always give me the freedom to share in the way that I feel like I can here." And so we also have to remember that like young people are much smarter than we often give them credit for, and how can we leave space for them to do some of that processing.
Mhm.
And then for me, a big tie-in that I've learned, especially teaching in the district that I do with a lot of white students, a lot of students with different privileges, is can bring up some different stuff in this conversation or these conversations. And so I really am intentional about teaching them, like you said, Nicole, this struggle around how to process and name your emotions, right? Like a lot of young people have that problem. And so pairing mindfulness work with social justice work really resonates with me around. I think about when I was 15 and in my social justice program learning all this stuff, I was experiencing like so much anger and like, what can I do? I don't know what to do. Everybody sucks. Like I didn't know how to process what was going on. And as I've become more comfortable and trained in mindfulness tools, I'm like, I feel like that was what was missing. Like the invitation to stop, breathe, process, journal, right? These tools that are becoming a lot more popular in classrooms, which is amazing. How can we think about pairing those with the social justice work and using these emotional intelligence tools as a way for us to guide through this really difficult process, especially when we're asking ourselves and our students to do what you named, Nicole, identity work, right? Like, how are we playing a role? So giving them those tools to also process that in a way that's healthy and safe, I think is really powerful.
So I think one thing I've really learned from both of you ladies is that it's really important to do the work. Nicole, you've been so patient with me over the years and saying that over and over again. And I do hear it. And I've been listening for a long time and thinking about this. Jenna, I think about the work. I'm so fortunate to work with you in the same district and see the work that not only you do, but that you draw teachers to. And Nicole, we actually talked about this too, around book clubs and around these recommendations of reading and doing the work of that reflecting. Um, I'm I'm curious about really crucial steps to that piece about not just being like, I read a book, so I'm good now, and I posted it on Twitter. How do we start making that work really actionable and make that connection to actual change that you would like to see or that needs to happen?
That's what I've really been like reflecting on. Like, I feel like those are my next steps. Because I know the work that I've done as I've read like White Fragility and Troublemakers and How to Be an Anti-Racist. Like, I know the work that I've done, but I feel like other people need to see that work and they need a guide because it goes so much further. Now, it is a great first step to recognize and acknowledge I need to learn, I need to pick up the book. But like, other than picking up the book, other than joining the book club, other than, posting it on Goodreads, like what happens next? And I oftentimes feel like, for some people, this is like, uncharted waters. Like they don't know what those next steps are. And like Jenna said, like it probably isn't going to be to go and be into the physical protest, or it may not be that you are confident or knowledgeable enough to lead those discussions, but walking people through, like maybe like it's reflective journaling, like maybe it is sentence stem so that you can have a conversation with your partner teacher. But there has to be something that comes after that book or that book study or that book chat, for sure.
Yeah. I think it's also so important to think about what books you're choosing based on where you're at, right? Like if you're feeling so stuck and you need to be guided through something, You might want to read a book like Me and White Supremacy by Layla Saad, right? That's a workbook that gives you questions for you to process and reflect on your experience, that takes you through an intentional learning journey, right? Like that might be the starting point for you if you need that guidance, right? Maybe White Fragility isn't the place to start because that book can be harder to get through if you haven't had some of that support or knowledge up front, right? But I think the other piece too is that literature gives us this like beautiful tool of language. And for me, one of the things that I've gained from those books that I read is like a new way to talk about it with somebody else. The word fragile as it related to whiteness was not in my vocabulary before I read that book. And now it is intensely in my vocabulary, right? Like I've taken that and brought it with me through the conversations that I have. So also recognizing that like knowledge for the sake of knowledge is amazing, but how can you pull it out of the text, like you're saying, Nicole? Like how can you bring it with you into these other spaces? And I don't think there's a perfect science to that. Like it's gonna look different for everybody for sure. But I think recognizing where you're at in the process is really important in guiding you towards which literature to start with.
Great points. And we, as we talk in this community, we are a community that grapples around lesson design and creating these digital experiences. We have in our district done some digital book clubs, creating HyperDocs. I absolutely adore the work of Scott and Joel. Oh my gosh, I'm blanking on Scott Bayer and Joel Garza. Sorry, just had a blank there. And the work they do with kids around HyperDocs and getting them to really process and think and to get it to stick. I think that's something that's really crucial as well. We in our district, Jenna, you were a big part of the bias book club and the HyperDoc that went along with that. Do you think that was effective method to help bring that language to teachers?
Yeah, I mean, it was much more effective than I thought it was going to be. I was actually really hesitant to take on that project and just a little nervous about trying to facilitate these conversations in a larger group of educators in the district, not just on my site, right? Like people I don't know that teach at other schools. And it was powerful. And when we got to remote learning, people were like, great, now what, are we going to finish reading the book? Like I haven't finished processing yet. Like they were panicking around this book club, and I was like, we have to do it remotely. And the feedback that I got from that process for teachers was much more than I could have imagined it would be. People were really receptive. The book Biased, if you haven't read it yet, takes a really scientific approach to the conversation around bias, which for a lot of fragile people is like a great inlet, right? That it's not so much opinion-y based, but it's like, here's the data, here's the science behind why our brain processes bias in the way that it does. And that really resonated with people. And then I also found that because we were asking people to have a vulnerable conversation, we set the standard around this is a safe space for you to explore so we can be better. People were vulnerable. They were open. They were honest. Like teachers were in there like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that I was calling all of my Indian students or Southeast Asian students the wrong name because I thought they looked alike, right? Like people were naming things that were uncomfortable to call out, but that's the work that needs to happen in order for us to move forward. We have to be able to say, I've done these things. I can recognize the impact that they might have had, and here's how I can move forward to avoid doing it. And so after the book club ended, I put out a Google form to ask if people would be interested in doing this again, and overwhelmingly they were. So I'm looking for a way to change it up next year, maybe do some sort of film study instead of book study. But this idea of inviting in educators to do continued work on themselves, I think is really important to keep PD balanced in that way, that we don't just offer PD around direct instructional practices and lesson design, but we offer PD around you doing self-work that will in turn help you shift your pedagogy and teach in a way that's more responsive.
I do appreciate that. Nicole, I'm sure you're smiling because you've been saying this to me for a long time. Slow down. you can't go to lesson design until you've done the work. And as this meeting of the minds today is around what can we do this summer? How can we spend our time this summer doing something? I am happy that this conversation is wrapped around a lot of literature and a lot of things we can do. I'm going to come back to you, Nicole, because I think you have some ideas for some professional development this summer. But I do want to touch on some work that Jenna has done as well in combination with teaching tolerance. Jenna, will you explain a little bit about the site and how teachers can utilize this site to extend that work and calling people into this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had the privilege of going to the Museum of Tolerance and doing a staff training with teaching tolerance with some other teachers in my district last year. And it was a really powerful experience to be sort of out of the space in a new space being facilitated by the museum itself. And afterwards, I came back and had a conversation with Lisa about like, so now what? Like, do teachers apply these things? Like, they didn't really give us tools. It was like self-exploration work. Like, what happens after that, or what happens when teachers want more than that 2-day seminar that we got to have? And so I went on the Teaching Tolerance website, which has so much stuff on it. It's really overwhelming. And I was like, this might be why teachers are feeling a little bit stuck around what to do, right? Like finding student resources is relatively easy, but I was finding that some of the staff resources were harder to navigate. And so I just started recreating them with permission from Teaching Tolerance, of course, but started to turn some of them into HyperDoc lessons. Some of them were outdated and the links didn't work anymore. So just really recreating it in a way that was more accessible for teachers and organizing it categorically, so that if I know I'm in this space for lesson design, I can go to this website and click on the link that says lesson specific study, right? And I can look at resources for me to help me build the lesson. I can't go on there and find a lesson. That's not what this is for, right? It's for me to go on and go, I need support figuring out how to approach this topic. Here's a PD or an article or a video that I can watch that will give me some tools that I can apply to my own lesson design. And so the teachers are still the creators in the work, which I think is really important to maintain that agency. So the site is amazing. I think it's a really cool resource to get to go on, explore a lot of the things that Teaching Tolerance has to offer in a way that is a little bit easier to navigate, and then also serve as a gateway into going to the Teaching Tolerance site, exploring the student resources they have. They have these amazing podcasts that they've done around different topics that are so profound. Their newsletter offers monthly and weekly updates about things. They send timely resources around what's going on in the world. So it serves for me, and my intention with it was to say, teachers, here's a place for you to start, where you can look through categorically, figure out where you want to go through the lessons. Here's the lessons you can go through, make a copy, a template for you to fill in and do your journaling. And then after this, go to their site and figure out what you're going to do next with it. And I wanted to make that clear and accessible, that was the intention, that this is PD for you. Then you go there and you think about students. The same thing Nicole and I have been saying throughout this time together, right? Like, you start with yourself and then you go to the students and figure out how you can bring that to them. And so that's what I'm hoping this site can do for folks.
Yes, and I appreciate the site is linked here. It's up on the screen at bit.ly Teach Tolerance PD. And this is really, Nicole, I hope you see, in response to a few years of saying, do the work first. We, as a coach, we really wanted to, I loved your word though, Jenna, you said coddle before. Like, we don't want to coddle you. It's hard work. And to be frank and just really vulnerable, you can tell I am still in the midst of doing this work. And so I don't come across and want to come across like I know what I'm doing. I call you, Nicole, and I call Jenna, and I call other teachers who are doing this work to make sure that I'm on the right process. So Jenna, thanks for sharing that and the work that you have done. around that. But Nicole, I want to hear about what you have planned for educators this summer. It's incredible.
Yeah, I'll share that, but I want to first say, Jenna, I love that site. I have shared that. Lisa posted it, I think yesterday.
Yeah.
And so I have shared that. A lot of people have reached out and said, like right now, what can I do? Like, I want to be better. I want resources. I want to learn so that I can be better. And I can also be better for kids when we're with them, whatever that looks like in the fall, because we're still thinking that through. And so I just have a draft text and a drafted email that includes a link. And I'm like, I'm so glad you're thinking about that. Like, start here. It's a beautiful site and a great way for those who like don't know what to do to think through using teaching tolerance. And I second and amen everything you said about the teaching tolerance site, because that's always my first go-to. It's like, oh, I need to figure out how to help teachers with this, or if there's a difficult conversation. So I wanted to second that. But yeah, Lisa, so I have been getting with teachers this summer because I feel like my role, my job, even as a classroom teacher, before I moved into being a supporter of teachers, I just really like to help people. Like, I want to be helpful. I want to be resourceful. I'm always learning and curating resources and ideas so that when people need it, I can pull it. So one of the things that I've been doing this summer is I've been doing a weekly lunch and learn because, when we went into this full on everyone teach online mode in a matter of like half a second, it felt like, I know that people needed ideas and resources and things to do. So I've just been hopping online with teachers for 30 minutes at 12:10 Central Standard Time on Wednesdays to give them time to grab lunch at noon and then meet me at 12:10. And then we've just been looking at different resources and ideas and things that you can do with students, because we don't know what the fall is going to look like. Like, no one knows. Right now, people are just guessing, but we have no idea what the next school year is going to look like. So we've been doing lunch and learns, and then kind of as a springboard of, we were teaching in the middle of a pandemic. I've been having a lot of conversations with educators about like what happens next. Like, we are like, this is crisis teaching. Like, we're not homeschooling. We're not online teachers. We just survived a crisis, or we're surviving a crisis rather. So in the midst of crisis teaching, even in my own district, like, I've been really proud of some of the things that have come out of this emergency teaching. But we've been talking about like, how do we pause and extract the good things that have happened so that we can build on it for the fall? Because, if we don't like pause, Jenna, there I am again talking about reflecting, right? If we don't pause to reflect, like, we don't even know, like, we're just like running. And so I've had so many conversations with teachers and with my kids and with their friends about like, what did you like about this? Like, if you could do it over, like, what would you keep? What would you get rid of? And so this summer, July 20th and 21st, we're actually going to have the Rethink Learning Summit that like does just that. Like, it gives teachers the opportunity to like pause and breathe, because we all need to kind of do that first, but then also like rethink, like, we are poised at, this is the right time, the right opportunity to really like rethink what we're doing. Like, how do we like put anti-racist practices at the forefront of our pedagogy? Like, how do we use technology purposefully now that we've kind of survived this online crisis teaching? How do we think through what we did and what worked and what didn't? Like, how do we prioritize SEL and student relationships and seeing every single kid? Make sure that every single kid sees themselves. So that's going to happen July 20th and 21st. Jenna's going to be there in some way, shape, form, or fashion. Now that we've said it, we've put it in the universe. It has to happen. I don't think that you will leave with all the answers, because I think we all right now have more questions than anything. But I'm hoping that we'll create a space that allows teachers to leave with like more directed questions. Like, instead of just not knowing and wondering what, you'll have an avenue to get some of those answers to those questions as we move forward.
Well, I appreciate that work you're doing. I'm very excited about this summit. I'm also very excited about sometimes this new connection I think is happening here, and I am wondering, and actually I'm not wondering at all. I can imagine with our new HyperDoc Academy that our Academy members would love to see more from you and Jenna, Nicole, and so I am curious if you would be willing, I'm going to ask publicly now, to share more of your knowledge in the HyperDoc Academy and how you feel about that.
I would love to. I mean, Jenna, I think, Jenna, we're together now, just so you know.
This is the part that there's no breaking this up. Yeah.
There's no leaving me, girl. We're together.
I love it. I love connecting like this. Nicole, we did have one question. Are your Lunch and Learn sessions for all ages?
Yes, it's for all ages. You can just sign up on my site, NicoleTaylor.com. It's free, it's fun, it's fast paced, but you can always like reach out to me afterwards. I love to jump on a Zoom or a Hangout to answer questions. It's very collaborative. We focus on one tool, one idea.
Yeah, I have to say, Nicole, you're one of my favorite presenters because it's very interactive and you really, I don't know how you fit it all in, but it's amazing how much content you fit in an amount of time, but I don't feel rushed. And I feel like I actually had time to process and think and connect and do all those things. So I go to any session you are ever presenting. So
Thanks.
I highly recommend those. Speaking of summer learning, I want to invite in our colleague, Kelly, if she would join in and share a little bit about HyperDoc summer learning.
Well, first, I just want to say thank you, all three of you, for such an engaging conversation. It's such important work, and I just, we were in the background communicating with the live viewers, and I'm so grateful that people can come back and rewatch this conversation because you're both also knowledgeable, and it was just really, really helpful. And it is about, like, summer is about pausing, taking a break, but also reflecting, like you said, Nicole, on what works, what you need to take a different approach on. You brought up such important points, like how do we have those conversations when we're not face-to-face in the classroom? How do we leverage, something's happening in the news, and typically I would pause my lesson for that day and bring students around this and give them a vulnerable space to process their ideas, but how do I do that remotely? And those are things that we're contemplating. So I just want to invite say thank you for bringing up those issues. And also, if you're new to HyperDocs and you're just still like new to our HyperDoc Facebook community and wondering, what is this all about? That's why we built the Academy, to just meet everyone where they're at. So there is this thread around where Nicole and Jenna are talking about, but if you're still wondering what is a HyperDoc and how will I use those in order to teach in this way that we're talking about, this week we released some summer study guides. Not summer, I guess you could use them anytime, but on the website, if you go to hyperdocs.co/guides, we have 3 different study guides that we're sharing with our users. One is for how to access the Academy and get started with the Getting Started courses. And there's courses that are just learning what HyperDocs are and getting started. And then we have a Building Confidence to Teach Remotely course as well. So that has 2 online learning study guides that you can really, you can print them out if you're someone who likes paper and you want to sit and just jot down your thoughts, or you can do them digitally. You can work alone, or you can bring your people together and have these conversations like we're talking about, having these book clubs. And then another resource is if you already have a copy of the HyperDoc handbook, or if you want to just take some of your learning offline this summer because you just want to have that paper in your hand and put some Post-its around a book, we have a book study guide that we've shared as well. So I just want to invite you to check out those resources because they can help with the digital technology piece in order to have the kind of classroom that we're envisioning and speaking about today. And then I also just want to give a shout out to our community that we meet here every Saturday at 11 o'clock, because this is not a one and done thing. This isn't something we live and breathe and want to reflect on all the time. And so the summer learning is going to be relevant to where we're at in the world. And you can always meet us here on Facebook too to have those conversations.
Thank you so much, Kelly. And to wrap it up, even though I'd love to continue chatting with all of you, Jenna and Nicole, any last message you have for our viewers who are watching today?
I just want to say thanks for this conversation today. And you guys already know I love HyperDocs. I think they're a great vehicle to encompass an entire lesson to help students think, but also thinking about using them also for our own learning, using the work of Scott and Joel. They have some great curated resources. The site is just chock full of so many great resources. So, I know we always think kids first, but even in thinking about like us in our own learning, that they also serve a great purpose to help us work through doing that self-work also.
I'm gonna quickly respond to this question in the chat because I think it's a great one. I think there are tons of different sites that you can go to find stuff. I follow a lot of different grade level teachers on Instagram, and I get a lot of literature ideas from there and from Twitter as well. So I would say my favorite advice for questions like this is to find real teachers to collaborate with and ask their advice around what works for them. Sometimes I find that I'll Google an article about a book, and I've done this before, and then I'm like, great, I'll teach this book. And then I get halfway through it and I'm like, this isn't quite what I thought it was going to be. And that would have been avoided if I had talked to a teacher who knew that stuff. So my invitation would be to try and find other teachers who might be doing this work and collaborate directly with them to get some of those recommendations. But I mean, Teaching Tolerance has literature recs all over Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. You'll find educators sharing stuff, especially right now. So there's some good stuff out there, and that's a really great question. And then the last piece, thank you, Nicole, for letting me jump in on this conversation with you all. I'm really excited, and I just want to rename what you said and resell this seminar you're doing around. This is such a powerful moment we have to rethink how we teach, how we approach teaching and learning, what is important to us, what values do we have in the classroom, what is our why around teaching, right? And I think I've been doing a lot of that reflective work during this time, and so I can't wait for the seminar or the summit. And I encourage you all, as you leave this space, to think about how we can start rethinking education, not only because of this global pandemic, but as Nicole put it, because of our national pandemic, right? What do we need to do to directly be anti-racist educators?
Thank you so much to both of you. This has been a really meaningful time, and I really appreciate you giving up your Saturday morning for this. So we really appreciate it. And thank you all for joining in the HyperDoc community, wherever you may be. And we will see you throughout the week and next week as well. So thank you so much, friends. Give them a big hand. Nice job.